The steam billowed across the platform as the Northwestern Pacific Railroad train screeched to a halt at Willow Creek Station, Montana Territory, 1885. Travelers spilled onto the wooden platform, men in dusty suits, families reuniting in boisterous embraces, and workers unloading crates and parcels. Yet amid the chaos stood Tabitha Wilson, utterly alone, clutching a worn leather satchel and a letter promising a new life. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest bonnet, her traveling dress wrinkled from 3 days of hard travel, and her green eyes scanned the crowd with growing uncertainty. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as the station slowly emptied. Tabitha checked her timepiece for the 5th time in half an hour. Perhaps her intended husband had forgotten, or worse, changed his mind. She had sold everything she owned back in Boston to make this journey, to marry a man she'd never met, a cattle rancher named Warren Irwin who had advertised for a bride in the matrimonial news. His letters had been kind, if somewhat brief, describing his ranch and promising a good life together. "You ain't waiting by yourself anymore," came a deep voice from behind her. Tabitha whirled around, coming face to face with a tall man whose features were partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed Stetson. He wasn't what she had expected. In her imagination, Warren Irwin had been older, more polished perhaps. The man before her couldn't have been more than 30, with sun-weathered skin, intense blue eyes, and a strong jawline partially covered by several days' growth of beard. His clothing was practical faded denim trousers, a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and a leather vest. "Mr. Irwin?" she asked hesitantly. He nodded once, removing his hat. "Warren Irwin, madam. You'd be Miss Wilson, I reckon. Tabitha Wilson." She extended her hand, which he took briefly, his palm calloused against her smooth skin. "Train's late," he observed, glancing at the station clock. "Been waiting long, nearly an hour." His expression softened slightly. "Shouldn't have had to wait alone. My apologies." He reached for her satchel. "This all your belongings?" "I have a trunk," she explained, gesturing to where the baggage was being unloaded. Warren nodded and led her to the luggage cart. After retrieving her trunk, he loaded it onto a wagon parked nearby. The horse's 2 strong bay geldings stamped impatiently. "It's about 2 hours to the ranch," he explained as he offered his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. "Road gets rough past the town limits." Tabitha settled herself on the hard wooden seat, arranging her skirts carefully. The wagon lurched forward as Warren guided the horses down Willow Creek's main street. She took in the dusty frontier town with its false-fronted buildings, wooden sidewalks, and hitching posts. Men in wide hats and women in calico dresses moved about their business while children played in the street. It was worlds away from Boston's cobbled streets and brick townhouses. "Have you lived in Willow Creek long, Mr. Irwin?" she asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Going on 8 years, came out after the war." "You fought in the war between the states," he nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Union Army. Was just a boy when I enlisted. 17, though I told them I was 18. "My father fought as well," Tabitha offered. "He didn't return." Warren glanced at her then, his expression unreadable. "Sorry to hear that." They fell into silence again as the wagon left the town behind. The landscape opened up before them, rolling hills covered in grass turned golden by the summer sun, stands of cottonwoods and pines, and in the distance, mountains rising blue against the sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that both frightened and exhilarated Tabitha. "Your letters didn't mention how lovely the country is," she said. "Not much for putting things into words," Warren admitted. "Ranch is up ahead in that valley near the creek." As they crested a hill, Tabitha caught her first glimpse of what was to be her new home. The ranch house was larger than she'd expected, a substantial two-story structure built of logs with a wide porch. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a corral held about a dozen horses. In the distance, cattle grazed on the open range. "It's quite impressive," she said, genuinely surprised. Warren's expression remained neutral, but she thought she detected a hint of pride in his voice when he replied. "Started with nothing but a claim and 2 cows. Built it up over the years." As they approached the house, a large black and white dog came bounding toward the wagon, barking enthusiastically. Behind it, a young boy of perhaps 12 years emerged from the barn. Tabitha turned to Warren in confusion. "You didn't mention a child in your letters." A shadow passed over his face. "That's Daniel, my ranch hand Levy's boy. They live in the bunkhouse with the other hands." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Warren helped Tabitha down, his strong hands at her waist momentarily before he quickly released her, as if the contact made him uncomfortable. "Daniel," he called to the boy, who was now standing nearby, petting the dog. "Tell Levy to come help with Miss Wilson's trunk." The boy nodded and ran off toward one of the outbuildings. "We can go inside," Warren said, gesturing toward the house. "Mrs. Abernathy's prepared a room for you. Mrs. Abernathy, housekeeper, comes in days, lives in town with her husband." Tabitha followed him up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, sturdy furniture, clean floors, a large stone fireplace. It smelled of wood smoke and something savory cooking. A portly woman with silver-streaked hair pinned in a bun emerged from what Tabitha assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. "Ah, you must be Miss Wilson," she exclaimed, her round face breaking into a welcoming smile. "I'm Martha Abernathy, so pleased to meet you at last. Mr. Irwin's been fidgeting all morning waiting for your train." Warren cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Abernathy, would you show Miss Wilson to her room? I'm sure she'd like to rest after her journey." "Of course, dear. Follow me, Miss Wilson. I've prepared the blue room for you. It has the best view of the mountains." As Mrs. Abernathy led Tabitha up the stairs, the older woman chatted amicably. "We're all so glad you've come. Mr. Irwin's a good man, though he doesn't talk much. Been running this ranch on his own too long. Needs a woman's touch, this place does." The blue room was indeed lovely spacious, with a large bed covered in a handmade quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a wardrobe, and a rocking chair by the window that overlooked the valley and mountains beyond. "It's beautiful," Tabitha murmured, overwhelmed by the day's events. "Levy will bring up your trunk directly," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Supper's at 6. I've made beef stew and fresh bread. Thought you might appreciate a hearty meal after your journey." When the older woman had gone, Tabitha sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. This was to be her home now. Warren Irwin was to be her husband. In her letters, she had painted herself as a practical woman seeking security and companionship. She had not mentioned that she was also fleeing Boston and the unwanted advances of her late father's business partner, a man 30 years her senior who had made it clear he intended to have her, willing or not. Warren Irwin seemed decent enough, if reserved. Certainly not the type to force himself upon a woman. But could they build a life together? A marriage based on mutual need rather than affection? Tabitha rose and went to the window, gazing out at the vast Montana landscape. Perhaps they could in time. For now she had a roof over her head, safety, and the chance at a new beginning. It would have to be enough. That evening dinner was a quiet affair. Warren sat at the head of the table, Tabitha to his right. Mrs. Abernathy served them before retreating to the kitchen, leaving the soon-to-be-married couple to converse alone. "The stew is delicious," Tabitha said, trying once again to break the uncomfortable silence. Warren nodded, focused on his plate. "Mrs. Abernathy's a good cook." "Does she prepare all your meals?" "Comes in 6 days a week. Sunday's my own doing, though I usually take dinner with the men in the bunkhouse those days." Another silence fell. Tabitha studied Warren surreptitiously as they ate. Despite his rough exterior, there was something gentle in the way he handled things, the careful way he broke his bread, how he'd pulled out her chair before they sat, the fact that he'd clearly cleaned up for dinner, his hair still damp from washing. Finally, Warren cleared his throat. "I suppose we should discuss arrangements." Tabitha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Arrangements, the wedding," he clarified quickly, looking equally uncomfortable. "Reverend Parker comes through town every other Sunday. He'll be here this weekend. I thought we might." "That is, if you're agreeable." "This Sunday would be fine," Tabitha said softly. 4 days to prepare herself for becoming Mrs. Warren Irwin. "It won't be much of a ceremony," he warned. "Just us, the Reverend, maybe Mrs. Abernathy, and a few of the men as witnesses." "That's perfectly acceptable." Warren nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Until then, you'll stay in the blue room, of course. I'm down the hall." He hesitated, then added, "I want you to know that I intend to honor our agreement, Miss Wilson. I'll provide for you, protect you." "I don't expect." He trailed off, visibly uncomfortable. "I understand, Mr. Irwin," Tabitha replied, touched by his consideration. "And I intend to fulfill my part as well, to keep your home, support your work." Something shifted in Warren's expression, a softening around his eyes, perhaps. "If you'd like to see more of the ranch tomorrow, I could show you around." "I'd like that very much." After dinner, Warren excused himself to check on the livestock, and Tabitha helped Mrs. Abernathy clear the table despite the older woman's protests. "He's not what you expected, is he, Mrs. Abernathy asked as they washed dishes together. Tabitha considered the question. "I'm not sure what I expected. His letters were concise." Mrs. Abernathy chuckled. "That's Warren for you, man of few words. But mark mine, there's a good heart underneath all that quiet. Lost his family young, fought in a terrible war before he was properly grown, then came out here to start fresh. Built everything you see with his own 2 hands. He mentioned he's been here 8 years. That's right. Came in '77 with nothing but determination and some savings from his army pay. First few years were hard drought, harsh winters, rustlers, but he persevered. Now he's got one of the finest spreads in the territory." Tabitha absorbed this information, adding it to the sparse knowledge she had of the man she was to marry. "Does he have any family at all, Mrs. Abernathy?" shook her head. "None that I know of. That's why I was so pleased when he decided to advertise for a wife. Man shouldn't be alone in this world." She patted Tabitha's hand. "He may not show it easily, but he needs you, dear." That night, as Tabitha prepared for bed in her new room, she found herself wondering about the enigmatic Warren Irwin. Mrs. Abernathy's words echoed in her mind. "He needs you." But what did she need? Security, yes. Protection from the man she'd fled in Boston. But was it fair to marry Warren without affection? As she braided her hair for the night, Tabitha gazed out the window at the star-filled Montana sky. Perhaps affection could grow, given time and nurturing, like the crops and livestock that thrived under Warren's care. She would give this marriage her best effort. It was, after all, her choice, the first real choice she'd made for herself since her father's death. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Tabitha dressed in her most practical gown, a blue cotton with minimal bustle and trim, and made her way downstairs to find Warren already at the breakfast table, a cup of coffee in hand, studying some papers. He rose quickly when she entered. "Good morning, Miss Wilson. Did you sleep well?" "Very well, thank you," she replied, noting that he looked less tired than the previous day, his blue eyes clearer in the morning light. "The mountain air is quite invigorating." Mrs. Abernathy bustled in with a plate of scrambled eggs, bacon, and biscuits for Tabitha. "Eat up, dear. You'll need your strength for touring the ranch." After breakfast, Warren led Tabitha outside where two horses waited, a gentle-looking Palomino mare and a sturdy bay gelding. "I thought we might ride," he explained, noting her surprised expression. "Can you?" "Yes, I can ride," Tabitha assured him. "Though it's been some time. We kept a carriage in Boston, but riding for pleasure wasn't practical in the city." Warren nodded. "Sunny here is the gentlest mare on the ranch. She'll take good care of you." He helped Tabitha mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. She arranged her skirts as modestly as possible on the side saddle, grateful that she'd chosen her simpler dress. Warren swung effortlessly onto his own mount. "We'll start with the pastures close to home, then work our way out." They rode at a leisurely pace through the ranch lands. Warren pointed out features of the property: the creek that provided water year-round, the south pasture where he grew hay for winter feed, the stand of pines that sheltered the cattle during storms. "How many cattle do you run?" Tabitha asked, genuinely interested. "About 500 head now. Started with just 2 cows and a bull I purchased from a rancher over in Bozeman. Each year the herd grows stronger." "And the men who work for you?" 4 permanent hands: Levy Jenkins, his son Daniel who helps around the place, Carlos Mendez, Jacob Turner, and Franklin Simmons. Hire extra men during roundup and branding." His mouth quirked in what might almost have been a smile. "They're curious about you. Been asking questions since I got your letter accepting my proposal." Tabitha found herself smiling in return. "And what did you tell them?" "Not much. That you were coming, that you were from Boston." He glanced at her. "Didn't know much else myself." "What would you like to know, Mr. Irwin?" He considered this as they rode, the horses picking their way along a well-worn trail. "Why'd you answer my advertisement? Plenty of men looking for wives in Boston, I imagine." Tabitha hesitated. Should she tell him the truth? About Mr. Blackwell's unwanted advances, the way he'd made it clear that, without a husband to protect her, she was vulnerable. About how she'd felt trapped in the city after her father's death, with no family and dwindling resources. "I needed a change," she said finally. "After my father died last year, there seemed little reason to stay in Boston. I've always been practical by nature, Mr. Irwin. Your advertisement offered security and a new beginning. I thought we might suit." Warren nodded slowly, seeming to accept her answer, incomplete as it was. "And your family? No one objected to you traveling so far?" "I have no family left. My mother died when I was 14. My father, as I mentioned, fought in the war and never fully recovered from his injuries. He passed last spring." She swallowed hard. "I was teaching at a girls' school to support myself." "You're educated then?" "Yes. My father believed in education for women. I attended the Boston Female Academy." Something like admiration flickered across Warren's features. "We've got a small schoolhouse in town. Teacher left last spring to get married. Children have been without lessons since." "Perhaps I could be of assistance there," Tabitha suggested. "Once I've settled in, perhaps." They crested a hill, and the view opened up before them: miles of grassland, dotted with cattle stretching toward distant mountains. The beauty of it caught Tabitha's breath. "It's magnificent," she murmured. Warren looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since her arrival. "Yes," he agreed, though Tabitha wasn't entirely sure he was still referring to the landscape. They continued their tour, stopping occasionally to rest the horses or for Warren to point out some feature of the ranch. He showed her a small cabin tucked against a hillside. "First place I built when I claimed the land," he explained. "Lived there 3 years before I could afford to build the main house." "You built everything yourself?" Tabitha asked, impressed. "Had help with the main house, but the cabin, yes." He dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "Would you like to see inside?" The cabin was simple but solidly built, one room with a stone fireplace, a bed frame, table, and chair, all crafted by hand. Though no longer lived in, it was clean and maintained. "I come up here sometimes," Warren admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "When the main house feels too empty." The vulnerability in his admission touched Tabitha deeply. This man, who seemed so self-sufficient, so capable, also knew loneliness. "It's lovely," she said softly. "There's something special about a place built with one's own hands." Warren's eyes met hers, and for a moment, something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps. Then he cleared his throat and gestured toward the door. "We should head back. Mrs. Abernathy will have lunch waiting." As they rode back to the main house, Tabitha felt a shift between them. Something had eased. Warren pointed out a hawk circling overhead, explained how the different grasses indicated water sources, told her the names of wildflowers they passed. His voice grew more animated when he spoke of the land, his passion for it evident. Lunch was a simple affair of cold meat, cheese, and fresh bread. Afterward, Warren reluctantly explained that he needed to ride out to check on a section of fence that had been reported damaged. "I understand," Tabitha assured him. "You have responsibilities. You could come along if you'd like," he offered hesitantly. Tabitha was touched by the invitation but could see the conflict in his expression, the desire to be polite warring with the need to work efficiently. "Perhaps another day. I should unpack my trunk and settle in. And I'd like to explore the house a bit more, if that's acceptable." Relief and what might have been disappointment mingled in his expression. "Of course, whatever you'd like." After Warren rode out with 2 of his ranch hands, Tabitha spent the afternoon exploring her new home. The house was solidly built and well-maintained, though sparsely decorated. The main floor consisted of a parlor, dining room, kitchen, and Warren's study, a masculine space with a desk, bookshelves, and a comfortable leather chair. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, the master, which she assumed was Warren's, her blue room, and 2 empty chambers. In one of the empty rooms, Tabitha found several crates of books. Curious, she opened one to discover volumes of poetry, history, philosophy, and fiction, Whitman, Thoreau, Shakespeare, Dickens, and more. They were well worn, obviously read and treasured. "Those were Mr. Irwin's mother's books," Mrs. Abernathy explained, finding Tabitha examining the collection. "He brought them all the way from Pennsylvania. Been meaning to build proper shelves for them, but never seems to find the time. He's a reader then, when he can manage it. Winter evenings mostly, when the work slows down." Another piece of the puzzle that was Warren Irwin fell into place. A man who valued literature, who had preserved his mother's books through war and westward travel, who built a substantial house with room for a family that didn't exist. That evening, Warren returned dusty and tired from his work. He washed up and joined Tabitha for dinner, listening attentively as she described her exploration of the house. "I hope you don't mind that I looked through the books," she said. "They're a wonderful collection." "They were my mother's," Warren confirmed. "She was a school teacher before she married my father. Taught me to read before I ever set foot in a schoolhouse. They must be very precious to you." "One of the few things I have from before the war." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to read any of them." "Thank you, I would like that." As they were finishing dinner, one of the ranch hands, Carlos, Tabitha had learned, appeared at the door with news of a cow in difficulty calving. Warren excused himself immediately. "These things happen sometimes," Mrs. Abernathy explained as she cleared the table. "Even this late in the season, there's always a cow or two that calves off schedule." "Will he be gone long?" Tabitha asked. "Could be hours, dear. Difficult birthings take time and patience." Tabitha nodded, feeling strangely disappointed. She had been enjoying their conversation, brief as it was. Warren had been more forthcoming this evening, even asking a few questions about her life in Boston. Unable to settle, Tabitha found herself wandering to Warren's study after helping Mrs. Abernathy with the dishes. The older woman had departed for her home in town, leaving Tabitha alone in the house. The study door stood ajar, and she hesitated only briefly before entering. The room smelled of leather, paper, and the faint scent of pipe tobacco. A large desk dominated the space, its surface neat and organized. Bookshelves lined one wall, containing ledgers, agricultural journals, and a few volumes that appeared to be military history. A comfortable armchair sat near the window with a small table beside it, an oil lamp, and a book laid open and face down. Curiosity got the better of her, and Tabitha picked up the book. It was a collection of Tennyson's poetry, open to Ulysses. She smiled, picturing Warren reading poetry by lamplight after a long day's work. It seemed incongruous with his rugged exterior, yet somehow perfectly fitting with the thoughtful man she was beginning to glimpse beneath the surface. She replaced the book exactly as she'd found it and left the study, feeling that she'd intruded enough on Warren's private space. In the parlor, she found another book, a guide to Western flora, and settled in to read until Warren returned. It was past midnight when the sound of boots on the porch roused Tabitha from where she dozed off in the chair. Warren entered quietly, looking exhausted but pleased. "I'm sorry," Tabitha said, setting aside her book. "I must have fallen asleep waiting." Warren looked surprised to find her still up. "You didn't have to wait. It's late. I wanted to know how things turned out. With the cow," a small smile touched his lips. "Mother and calf are doing fine. Big, healthy bull calf, I'm glad." Tabitha rose, smoothing her skirts. "You must be tired. Used to it." He glanced at the book she'd been reading, "Finding Everything You Need." "Yes, thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I hope you don't mind, but I looked at the book you were reading in your study." Tennyson. Warren's expression was unreadable in the dim light. "My mother's favorite. Helps me think sometimes." Tabitha nodded, feeling a connection to this man who found solace in poetry after a day of physical labor. "Mine too," she said softly. "Ulysses was my father's favorite poem. He used to recite it from memory. 'To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield,'" Warren quoted quietly. "Yes," Tabitha whispered, unexpectedly moved. "Exactly that." They stood in silence for a moment, the connection between them almost tangible in the quiet house. "I should get some rest," Warren finally said, his voice rough. "Tomorrow's another early day." "Of course. Good night, Mr. Irwin." "Warren," he said suddenly. "You should call me Warren." Tabitha smiled. "Good night, Warren. I'm Tabitha." "Good night, Tabitha," he replied, her name sounding different, special in his deep voice. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Tabitha felt a warmth in her chest that hadn't been there before. Perhaps this arrangement might work out after all. Perhaps they might find more than mere security in their union. The days leading up to Sunday passed quickly as Tabitha settled into life at the ranch. She helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, learning the rhythms of the place. She explored the property on her own, gaining confidence on horseback again. Each evening, she and Warren would share dinner, their conversations gradually becoming more comfortable, less strained. Warren told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his parents who had died of typhoid when he was 16, his enlistment in the Union Army, and his decision to head west after the war's end. Too many ghosts back east, he explained simply. In turn, Tabitha shared stories of her life in Boston, her father's decline after the war, her teaching position. She carefully avoided mentioning Mr. Blackwell and the real reason for her flight west. On Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Abernathy arrived with a package wrapped in brown paper. "A wedding gift," she announced, handing it to Tabitha. "Every bride needs something special for her day." Inside was a beautiful cream-colored dress with delicate lace trim, not an elaborate wedding gown, but far nicer than anything Tabitha had brought with her. "Mrs. Abernathy, I can't accept this. Nonsense, dear. It was my daughter's. She wore it for her wedding 5 years ago before moving to Oregon with her husband. It might need a few adjustments, but I think it will suit you nicely." Tears pricked Tabitha's eyes at the woman's kindness. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." That evening, Warren seemed unusually nervous at dinner, pushing food around his plate more than eating it. "Is something wrong?" Tabitha finally asked. Warren set down his fork. "I wanted to give you something before tomorrow." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, sliding it across the table to her. Tabitha opened it to find a simple gold band, elegant in its plainness. "It was my mother's," Warren explained, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "If you'd prefer something else, something new, I understand. There's a jeweler in Helena. It's perfect," Tabitha interrupted, genuinely touched. "Truly, Warren, I'm honored you would give me something so meaningful." Relief washed over his features. "I want you to know that I intend to be a good husband, Tabitha. I may not be a man of many words, but I keep my promises." "I believe you," she said softly. And she did. In the short time she'd known him, Warren Irwin had proven himself to be honorable, kind, and thoughtful if reserved. "There's something else," he said, hesitation in his voice. "Something I should tell you before tomorrow." Tabitha waited, suddenly apprehensive. "The ranch is doing well now, but it wasn't always so. 3 years ago there was a drought. I nearly lost everything. Had to take out loans against the property." He met her gaze directly. "I've been working to pay them back, and we're on solid ground now, but I want you to know the truth about our situation." "Thank you for telling me," Tabitha said, touched by his honesty. "My father always said that the measure of a man isn't whether he falls, but whether and how he rises again." Something in Warren's expression eased. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. Tabitha hesitated, then decided that Warren's honesty deserved equal candor from her. "There's something I should tell you as well, about why I really left Boston." Slowly, haltingly at first, then with growing confidence, Tabitha told Warren about Mr. Blackwell, her father's business partner, who had helped manage her affairs after her father's death, who had gradually revealed his true nature, whose advances had become increasingly threatening. He made it clear that as a woman alone I had few options, that eventually I would have no choice but to accept his protection. She swallowed hard. "When I saw your advertisement, I saw a way out, a chance to escape before." She couldn't finish the sentence. Warren's expression had darkened as she spoke, his hands clenching into fists on the table. "Did he harm you?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "No, not physically, but his threats were explicit." Warren was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "Thank you for telling me, for trusting me with the truth." He hesitated, then reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You're safe here, Tabitha, I promise you that." The warmth of his hand on hers sent a flutter through her chest. "I know," she whispered. They sat that way for several moments, connected by touch and newfound understanding. When Warren finally withdrew his hand, Tabitha felt its absence keenly. "Tomorrow's a big day," he said, rising from the table. "You should rest." That night, as Tabitha prepared for bed, she found herself unexpectedly calm about the wedding. Warren Irwin wasn't the husband she had imagined for herself as a young girl, but he was a good man, thoughtful, honorable, and kind in his quiet way. She could build a life with him, perhaps even find happiness. Sunday dawned clear and beautiful. Mrs. Abernathy arrived early to help Tabitha dress and arrange her hair. The cream-colored dress fit nearly perfectly, needing only minor adjustments to the hem. "You look beautiful, dear, Mrs. Abernathy declared, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Warren won't know what hit him. A knock at the door heralded the arrival of Levy Jenkins, Warren's foreman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a weathered face. "Reverend Parker's here, madam," he announced. "Everything's ready downstairs whenever you are." Tabitha took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "I'm ready." The ceremony was simple, held in the parlor of the ranch house. Warren stood by the fireplace with Reverend Parker, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. His eyes widened when Tabitha entered, and something like wonder passed over his features. The ranch hands stood respectfully along the wall, hats in hands. Mrs. Abernathy dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief as Levy led Tabitha to Warren's side. The Reverend's words were traditional and brief. When it came time for the vows, Warren's voice was steady and sure. Tabitha's heart pounded as she repeated her own promises, feeling the weight of the moment, the irreversibility of the step she was taking. When Warren slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, his hands were gentle, almost reverent. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his blue eyes holding hers intently. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Parker announced. For a moment, Warren hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. Then he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle but firm, brief but unmistakably genuine. Tabitha felt a warmth spread through her at the contact, a pleasant tingling that lingered even after he pulled away. "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Warren Irwin," the Reverend declared, and the small gathering broke into applause and congratulations. Mrs. Abernathy had prepared a wedding feast: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and a small cake. The ranch hands ate heartily, offering good-natured ribbing to their boss about married life. Warren took it in stride, more relaxed than Tabitha had yet seen him, even smiling occasionally. As the afternoon waned, the men gradually departed to their duties, and Reverend Parker headed back to town with Mrs. Abernathy, who would return in the morning. And then they were a lone husband and wife in name, still strangers in many ways. "Would you like to see the rest of the property?" Warren asked, clearly uncertain about what came next. "There's a spot by the creek I thought you might like." Relieved at the suggestion of an activity, Tabitha agreed readily. They changed into more practical clothes and rode out together, Warren leading the way along a trail that followed the creek upstream. The land grew more wooded, cottonwoods and willows creating a green canopy overhead. Finally, they reached a small clearing where the creek widened into a pool. Wildflowers dotted the grassy bank, and the late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, creating dappled patterns on the ground. "It's beautiful," Tabitha breathed as Warren helped her dismount. "Found it my first week here," he said, tethering the horses. "Come here sometimes to think." They sat side by side on a fallen log near the water's edge, watching the play of light on the rippling surface. The tension between them had eased somewhat during the ride, but Tabitha was acutely aware of their new status, of what the night might bring. "Warren," she began hesitantly, "I want you to know that I understand the obligations of marriage. I'm not naive about what is expected." Warren's expression was unreadable as he studied the creek. "I meant what I said before, Tabitha. I'll honor my promises to you, all of them." He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "But I won't rush you, this isn't. It isn't how most marriages begin. We're still getting to know each other." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Tabitha's chest. "Thank you for your consideration." Warren nodded, then reached out hesitantly and took her hand in his. It was a small gesture, but significant, an acknowledgement of their new relationship, a step toward greater intimacy. They sat that way for some time, hands linked, watching the creek flow by, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they would build together. That night, Warren showed Tabitha to the master bedroom, a large room with a sturdy four-poster bed, a dresser, wardrobe, and washstand. Her trunk had already been moved in, placed beside the wardrobe. "I'll take one of the other rooms tonight," he said, hovering in the doorway. "Give you time to settle in." Tabitha nodded, both relieved and strangely disappointed. "Thank you." Warren lingered a moment longer. "Tabitha, I want you to know that I'm glad you're here, that you answered my advertisement." A hint of color touched his cheeks. "You're not what I expected. You're more." Before she could respond, he leaned forward and kissed her gently on the forehead. "Good night, Mrs. Irwin." Then he was gone, leaving Tabitha standing in the middle of what was now their bedroom, her hand raised to touch the spot where his lips had pressed against her skin, her heart beating a swift, confused rhythm in her chest. The weeks that followed settled into a new routine. Warren rose early each morning to work with his men, returning at midday for a quick meal before heading out again until evening. Tabitha took charge of the household, working alongside Mrs. Abernathy, learning about the ranch, and gradually making the house more of a home. She unpacked Warren's mother's books, arranging them on shelves in the parlor where they could be enjoyed. She planted a small kitchen garden with Mrs. Abernathy's guidance. She rode out occasionally to bring lunch to Warren and his men, gradually learning more about the operation of the ranch. At night, they would sit in the parlor after dinner, sometimes reading, sometimes talking. Warren began to share more about his experiences, the war, his early struggles with the ranch, his hopes for the future. Tabitha told him about her teaching, her love of literature, her childhood in Boston. Their physical relationship progressed slowly, tentatively. A brush of hands as they passed the salt. Warren's hand at the small of her back as he guided her through a doorway. A good-night kiss that lingered a moment longer each evening. Warren continued to sleep in one of the spare bedrooms, though Tabitha increasingly found herself wishing he would join her in the master bedroom. There was an attraction between them. She felt it in the way his eyes followed her across a room, in the quickening of her pulse when he stood close. But Warren seemed determined not to rush her, to give her time to adjust to her new life. A month after the wedding, Tabitha rode into Willow Creek with Warren to purchase supplies. It was her first visit to town since her arrival, and she was curious to see more of the community that would now be part of her life. Willow Creek was typical of frontier towns, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, wooden sidewalks, horses and wagons tied at hitching posts. There was a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a blacksmith, and at the end of the street, a white clapboard church with a modest steeple. As they tied their horses in front of the general store, Tabitha noticed several people watching them with undisguised curiosity. Warren offered his arm as they stepped onto the sidewalk, a gesture that seemed both protective and proud. "Mrs. Thornton runs the store," he explained as they entered. "She knows everything that happens in town, so brace yourself for questions." A plump woman with graying hair looked up from where she was arranging fabric bolts, her face lighting up at the sight of them. "Warren Irwin, and this must be your bride," She hustled over, extending her hand to Tabitha. "Emma Thornton, my dear, so pleased to finally meet you. We've all been curious about the woman who captured our most eligible bachelor." Tabitha shook the woman's hand, smiling warmly. "Tabitha Irwin. It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Thornton. Oh, call me Emma, dear. Everyone does." She looked Tabitha up and down appraisingly. "Warren said you were from Boston. Must be quite an adjustment coming to Montana territory." "It is, but a welcome one. The country is beautiful and everyone has been very kind." "Well, we're delighted to have you. Aren't we, Warren?" She turned to include him in the conversation, but Warren had already moved to examine a display of tools, clearly uncomfortable with the social niceties. Emma lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Don't mind him, dear. He's always been the quiet sort. Respected by everyone, of course, but not one for chit-chat." As Emma helped them gather their supplies, she filled Tabitha in on local news and gossip, who was expecting a baby, whose crops were doing well, the latest developments with the railroad. Tabitha listened attentively, aware that these people were now her neighbors, her community. "Oh," Emma exclaimed suddenly, "you must meet Reverend Miller. He's been looking for someone to take over the school. With your Boston education, you'd be perfect." Before Tabitha could respond, the store door opened and a tall, distinguished man in a black coat entered. "Speak of the devil," Emma said. "Reverend, come meet Mrs. Irwin." Reverend Miller approached with a warm smile, extending his hand first to Warren, who had rejoined them, and then to Tabitha. "Mrs. Irwin, a pleasure. I've been hoping to meet you." "Likewise, Reverend." "Mrs. Thornton mentioned you were a teacher in Boston," he inquired. "Yes, at a girls' academy. Our school teacher left us in the spring. The children have been without instruction for months now. We've been hoping to find someone qualified before winter sets in." Tabitha glanced at Warren, uncertain how he would feel about her taking on such a role. To her surprise, he nodded encouragingly. "Tabitha is well educated, Reverend. She'd make an excellent teacher if she's interested." Warmth spread through her at his support. "I would be very interested in discussing the position, Reverend Miller." "Wonderful. Perhaps you could come by the church tomorrow. We can discuss the details." After completing their purchases, Warren and Tabitha continued through town, stopping at the blacksmith shop and the post office. Everywhere they went, people greeted Warren with respect and welcomed Tabitha with friendly curiosity. As they rode home later, supplies loaded in saddlebags and a pack horse trailing behind, Tabitha found herself smiling. "What is it?" Warren asked, noticing her expression. "I was just thinking how different Willow Creek is from Boston. Everyone knows everyone else. There's a sense of community." Warren nodded. "It's one of the things I value about living here. People look out for each other. Have to, out on the frontier." "Did you mean what you said to Reverend Miller about me teaching?" "Of course." Warren looked surprised that she would question it. "You're educated, experienced. The children need a teacher. Seems a natural fit." "But what about my responsibilities at the ranch?" "We'll manage," he said simply. "The school's only in session during the day, and it's important work." Tabitha was touched by his support. In Boston, many men would have considered it inappropriate for their wives to work outside the home, especially after marriage. Warren's matter-of-fact acceptance of her abilities and his willingness to accommodate her interests spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you," she said softly. Warren glanced at her, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No need to thank me, Tabitha. I want you to be happy here." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Tabitha found herself studying her husband's profile. In the month since their wedding, she had come to admire many things about Warren Irwin: his integrity, his quiet strength, his consideration for others. But there was something more now, a warmth in her chest when he looked at her, a flutter in her stomach when their hands touched. "Warren," she said softly, "I'm glad I came here, that I answered your advertisement." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "So am I." Tabitha gathered her courage. I think it's time you moved your things into our bedroom." Warren's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, understanding her meaning. "Are you certain?" "Yes," she said simply. That night, Warren Irwin joined his wife in the master bedroom. Their coming together was gentle, considerate, and surprisingly passionate. Afterward, as Tabitha lay in the circle of Warren's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she realized that what had begun as an arrangement of convenience had become something far more meaningful. "Tabitha," Warren murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "I never expected to find someone like you. When I wrote that advertisement, I was looking for a practical partnership, not—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Not this," she suggested, understanding what he couldn't quite express. "No, not this." He tightened his arms around her. "This is much better." Tabitha smiled in the darkness, pressing a kiss to his chest. "I agree." The following day, Tabitha met with Reverend Miller and accepted the position as Willow Creek schoolteacher. The school term would begin in 2 weeks, with approximately 20 children ranging in age from 6 to 15. "Most of them are from ranching and farming families," the Reverend explained. "Good children, eager to learn, though their attendance can be irregular during planting and harvest seasons." "I understand," Tabitha assured him. "I'll do my best with whatever time I have with them." When she returned to the ranch and shared the news with Warren, he surprised her with a gift, a leather satchel for carrying books and papers, crafted by the local saddle maker. "I ordered it when we were in town yesterday," he explained, looking pleased with her delighted reaction. "Thought you might need it." It was a thoughtful, practical gift, and Tabitha was touched by the gesture. "It's perfect, Warren. Thank you." That evening, as they sat together on the porch after dinner, Warren seemed preoccupied, staring out at the darkening landscape with a slight frown. "Is something wrong?" Tabitha asked. Warren hesitated, then turned to face her. "I received a letter today from the bank in Helena. One of my larger loans is coming due sooner than expected. The banker who handled it originally has been replaced, and the new man is less flexible." Tabitha felt a flutter of concern. "Is there a problem? You mentioned the ranch was doing well now." "It is, but most of our assets are tied up in cattle and land. The cash flow is tight, especially before the fall drive when we take the cattle to market." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Tabitha had come to recognize as a sign of stress. "I may need to sell some breeding stock to cover it, which would set us back next year." Tabitha considered this problem. "How much is needed?" Warren named a sum that made her eyes widen slightly. It was substantial, though not ruinous. "I may have a solution," she said slowly. "When my father died, he left me a small inheritance. It's not a large amount, but it might be enough to cover the loan. The funds are still in a Boston bank." Warren looked surprised, then troubled. "Tabitha, I can't ask you to use your inheritance for this." "You're not asking, I'm offering." She reached out and took his hand. "Warren, we're partners now. What affects you affects me. The ranch is our livelihood, our future." He studied her face for a long moment, emotions playing across his features, pride warring with practicality, independence with acceptance. "We would repay it, of course," he finally said. "After the cattle drive this fall." "Of course," Tabitha agreed, squeezing his hand. "I'll write to the bank tomorrow to arrange the transfer." That night, as they lay together in the darkness of their bedroom, Warren pulled Tabitha closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Thank you," he murmured. "Not just for the money, but for—" for understanding, for being willing to share the burdens as well as the joys. Tabitha turned in his arms to face him, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. That's what marriage is supposed to be, isn't it? A true partnership. Warren kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of gratitude, respect, and something deeper that neither of them had yet named but both were beginning to feel. 2 weeks later, Tabitha began teaching at the Willow Creek schoolhouse. The building was simple, one room with wooden desks, a blackboard, a pot-bellied stove for winter heating, and a small bell in the cupola above. The children were a diverse group, from the youngest 6-year-old Sarah Miller, the Reverend's daughter, to the oldest 15-year-old James Turner, son of one of the local ranchers. Some had attended school before with the previous teacher. Others had never had formal education. Tabitha found herself enjoying the challenge. She organized the children by ability rather than age, working with each group in turn while the others completed assignments. She introduced new books, brought in specimens from nature to study, and incorporated practical skills alongside traditional subjects. Word of her teaching methods spread quickly through the small community. Parents began to stop by to observe, and soon adults were asking if she might consider evening classes for those who wanted to improve their own education. "You've made quite an impression," Warren remarked one evening as they rode home together from town. He had taken to meeting her after school on the days she taught, escorting her back to the ranch. "Levy says his boy Daniel talks about nothing but school now." Tabitha smiled, pleased by the compliment. "They're bright children, eager to learn, and the parents have been very supportive." "They recognize quality when they see it," Warren said, his voice warm with pride. "Just as I did when I saw you step off that train." Tabitha glanced at him, touched by the rare admission. "Did you recognize quality, I mean?" Warren's eyes met hers, serious but with a hint of tenderness. "I did." Scared half to death, but standing straight and tall, facing whatever came next with courage. "I knew right then you were someone special." A warm glow spread through Tabitha's chest at his words. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but when you said I wasn't waiting alone anymore, I felt safe for the first time in months." Warren reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "You'll never have to wait alone again, Tabitha. Not as long as I'm alive." The simple promise, spoken in Warren's straightforward way, meant more to Tabitha than 1,000 flowery declarations might have from another man. As summer faded into fall, life at the Irwin ranch took on a new rhythm. Tabitha taught school 3 days a week, managed the household, and gradually made the house more of a home. Warren worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for the fall cattle drive, when he would take most of the herd to the railhead at Helena to be shipped east. Their evenings together became precious time, sharing meals, discussing their days, reading aloud to each other from Warren's mother's books, and discovering the joys of physical intimacy. Tabitha found herself falling more deeply in love with her husband with each passing day, and she began to see signs that Warren felt the same, though he struggled sometimes to express it in words. In late September, preparations for the cattle drive reached their peak. Warren would be gone for nearly 2 weeks, along with most of the ranch hands. Only Daniel and old Franklin would remain behind to help Tabitha with the essential daily chores. The night before his departure, Warren sat with Tabitha on the porch, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset. There was a tension in him that she hadn't seen before. "What is it?" she asked softly. "You seem troubled." Warren was silent for a long moment. "I don't like leaving you," he finally admitted. 2 weeks is a long time." "I'll be fine," Tabitha assured him. "Franklin knows the ranch and I've learned a great deal these past months. Besides, I'll be busy with the school. It's not that." Warren turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Tabitha, before I go, there's something I need to say, something I should have said before now." Her heart quickened at the intensity in his expression. "What is it?" "When I wrote that advertisement, I was looking for a practical arrangement. A partner to share the work, perhaps companionship. I never expected." He paused, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. "I never expected to feel this way. To find myself thinking about you when we're apart, to look forward to coming home each day because you're there." Tabitha's breath caught in her throat. "Warren, what I'm trying to say, Tabitha, is that I love you, not just as my wife, my partner, but with my whole heart. I love you in a way I didn't know was possible." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. "Oh, Warren, I love you too, so very much." He pulled her into his arms then, kissing her with a passion that spoke of love, desire, and the bittersweet knowledge of their impending separation. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Warren rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come back to you," he promised, "as quickly as I can." "I'll be waiting," Tabitha whispered. Not alone, but waiting all the same. That night, their lovemaking had a new dimension, a depth of emotion, a tender urgency born of their declared love and imminent parting. Afterward, as they lay entwined, Tabitha treasured each moment, knowing that tomorrow she would wake to an empty bed, an empty house. The cattle drive departed at dawn, Warren riding at the head of his men, leading nearly 400 cattle toward Helena. He had kissed Tabitha goodbye in the privacy of their bedroom, both of them reluctant to part, then again on the porch in front of the men, a more restrained but still meaningful farewell. 2 weeks, he reminded her. "Less if we make good time." "Be safe," she replied, touching his cheek one last time before he mounted his horse. The days that followed were busy but lonely. Tabitha threw herself into her teaching, extended her hours at the school, and worked on improving the house in Warren's absence. She hung curtains she had sewn, arranged wildflowers in vases, and tended her growing kitchen garden. A week into Warren's absence, Tabitha woke feeling unusually tired and slightly nauseated. She dismissed it as a passing illness, but when the symptoms persisted for several days, she began to wonder if it might be something else entirely. A visit to the town's doctor confirmed her suspicion. Tabitha was with child, approximately 2 months along. "The baby should arrive in early spring," Dr. Peterson told her with a smile. "April, I'd estimate." Tabitha walked home from the doctor's office in a daze of happiness and anticipation. A baby. Their baby. How would Warren react to the news? They hadn't discussed children specifically, though the master bedroom had 2 smaller rooms adjoining it that would be perfect for a nursery. She decided to wait until Warren returned to tell him, wanting to see his face when she shared the news. The cattle drive took longer than expected. A series of autumn storms slowed their progress, and it was nearly 3 weeks before Tabitha spotted riders approaching the ranch one late afternoon. She had been hanging laundry on the line, and she dropped the wet sheet back into the basket, hurrying to the porch to watch their approach. Warren rode at the head of the group, his broad-shouldered silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. Tabitha's heart raced as she watched him dismount and speak briefly to his men before turning toward the house. His stride was purposeful, eager, and when he caught sight of her on the porch, he broke into a run. Tabitha flew down the steps and into his arms. He caught her against him, lifting her off her feet in a crushing embrace before setting her down and kissing her thoroughly, heedless of the men watching with knowing grins. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair when they finally broke apart. "Every day, every hour." "And I you," she replied, drinking in the sight of him tired, trail dusty but whole and home at last. That evening, after Warren had bathed and eaten a proper meal, they sat together before the fire in the parlor. He told her about the cattle drive, the challenges they'd faced, the successful sale at the railhead, the healthy profit they'd made despite the delays. "Enough to repay your inheritance and set some aside," he said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "The ranch is on solid footing now." "I'm glad," Tabitha said, curled against his side on the sofa. "Warren, I have news as well." He looked down at her, one eyebrow raised in question. "What kind of news?" Tabitha took his hand and placed it gently on her abdomen, still flat but containing their growing child. "We're going to have a baby. In April." Warren went very still, his eyes widening as he processed her words. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, the most unguarded expression of joy Tabitha had ever seen from him. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "Our baby." "Yes," Tabitha confirmed, her own smile matching his. "Dr. Peterson confirmed it while you were away." Warren gathered her close, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child. "Are you happy about it?" he asked, suddenly uncertain. "It's sooner than we planned." "I'm overjoyed," Tabitha assured him. "I've always wanted children, and now with you." She touched his face tenderly. "There's no one I'd rather build a family with, Warren Irwin." He kissed her then, a kiss filled with love, promise, and shared dreams for the future. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, his blue eyes serious but warm. "I'll be a good father, Tabitha. I promise you that. Our child will never doubt they're loved and wanted." "I know," she whispered, her heart full to bursting. "We'll build a wonderful life for our family together." The months that followed were filled with preparations and anticipation. Warren converted one of the adjoining rooms into a nursery, crafting a cradle and a rocking chair with his own hands. Tabitha sewed baby clothes and blankets, taught her students with growing energy, and watched as her body changed to accommodate their growing child. The winter was harsh, with heavy snowfalls and bitter cold, but the Irwin home remained warm and cozy. Warren worked closer to home during these months, unwilling to be far from Tabitha as her pregnancy progressed. In the evenings, he would read aloud from his mother's books while Tabitha sewed, or they would simply talk, planning for the future, sharing hopes and dreams. "What shall we name the baby?" Tabitha asked one snowy evening as they sat before the fire. Warren considered the question seriously. "If it's a boy, perhaps Thomas after your father," Tabitha smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'd like that. And if it's a girl?" "What about Margaret after your mother, Margaret?" Warren tested the name, his expression softening. "Yes, I'd like that very much." As winter gave way to spring, Tabitha's time grew near. Warren became increasingly protective, hiring additional help for the ranch so that he could remain close to home. The community rallied around them as well. Mrs. Thornton organized a quilting bee, where the women of Willow Creek created a beautiful patchwork quilt for the baby, while the ranchers' wives took turns bringing meals and offering advice to the expectant mother. April arrived with warm breezes and wildflowers dotting the hills around the ranch. On a perfect spring morning, after a night of labor with the town midwife and Warren in attendance, Tabitha gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She had Warren's blue eyes and a dusting of Tabitha's chestnut hair. "Margaret," Tabitha whispered, cradling their daughter as Warren sat beside them on the bed, his arm around his wife, his expression one of awe and adoration. "Margaret Irwin," he agreed, gently touching the baby's tiny hand, which immediately curled around his finger. "She's perfect, Tabitha. Just like her mother." Tabitha leaned against Warren's strong shoulder, exhausted but filled with a happiness so complete it brought tears to her eyes. We did well, didn't we? For two strangers who met at a train station. Warren pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice rough with emotion. The best decision I ever made was waiting for that train. The best words I ever spoke were telling you that you weren't waiting alone anymore. And I'll never be alone again, Tabitha murmured, looking down at their daughter. None of us will. As the years passed, the Irwin family grew and thrived. A son, Thomas, joined them 2 years after Margaret's birth, followed by another daughter, Emma, named after Mrs. Thornton, who had become like family to them. The ranch prospered under Warren's careful management, expanding to become one of the most successful operations in the territory. Tabitha continued to teach, eventually overseeing the construction of a proper schoolhouse in Willow Creek as the town grew. They faced challenges together: drought years, harsh winters, the normal trials of raising children, but their partnership remained strong, their love deepening with each passing season. The practical arrangement that had begun with a mail-order bride stepping off a train alone had blossomed into a rich, full life built on love, respect, and shared purpose. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren surprised Tabitha with a gift: a small gold locket containing miniature portraits of their 3 children. "To remind you of what we've built together," he said, as he fastened it around her neck. "Though I suspect you need no reminding." Tabitha touched the locket tenderly before turning to embrace her husband. "The best things in life often come from unexpected beginnings," she said softly. "Who would have thought that a lonely young woman from Boston and a quiet rancher from Montana would find such happiness together?" Warren smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling in the way she had come to love. "I knew the moment I saw you standing alone on that platform," he said, his voice warm with certainty. "Something inside me recognized you, even before we'd spoken a word. And I knew the moment you said I wouldn't be waiting alone anymore," Tabitha replied, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "You've kept that promise every day since." As the sun set over their ranch, painting the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Warren and Tabitha Irwin stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. From a lonely train platform to a home filled with love and laughter, it had been an unexpected journey, but neither of them would have changed a single step along the way.